Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Raise the Vibe with Liz. I'm your host, Liz Peterson, and today I have AJ Parr joining me. For those of you who don't know AJ Parr is an internationally recognized Venezuelan journalist, best-selling author, and senior research associate at the Institute for Scientific Study of Consciousness. His dreams and near-death life experience led him to study the common roots of world religions during 3 decades and became a near-death experience journalist researcher. He has authored over 20 books on topics that include near-death experiences, comparative religion, human consciousness, and spirituality, including his bestseller, Stairway to Heaven, 25 near-death experiences about encounters with God, Jesus, and paradise. Super excited about this conversation. He did a wonderful presentation on IANS about his theory, the Tower of Babel. AJ, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Liz. It's an honor to be here. I'm really glad you invited me.
Yeah, super excited. I really like the Tower of Babel theory that you have and the perception of the spiritual realm. And gosh, the presentation was just wonderful. I'm super excited to go into all these bullet points that I have jotted down here about it. But why don't you start by sharing with the audience what led you to be doing this work today?
Yes, well, in 1991, I suddenly woke up in the middle of the night and I was immersed in this total blackness. It was so dark, I couldn't see anything. So I tried raising my hands and looking at them, but I couldn't see anything. So after that, I felt a presence, or at first I said, okay, what if there could be someone hidden in this darkness and I would never know. So I got scared just by imagining it. I said, okay, I started feeling the possibility of there being someone or something hidden in that darkness. And all of a sudden, my suspicions were proven because I heard a voice. And this voice said, surrender, all is one. So at that moment, my chest began to expand. I relaxed. I had no option. I simply like relaxed and my chest started expanding. This empty feeling in my chest started growing and it grew larger than myself. It grew larger than the place that was surrounded me. It grew so large that suddenly I uh, lost contact with that darkness and appeared in the middle of what seemed to be a bright star, an endless bright star or a sun. But this was huge, and I could see up and down to the right, to the left, in all directions at the same time. But in the middle, there was nothing. There was light. So imagine if you can see up and down at the same time, you would see yourself in the middle, right? But when I looked, since I could see up and down to right, to left, in all directions, I noticed that in the middle was like this emptiness filled with light. So I could see, I could follow each ray to infinity practically. And I could also, I don't know if this was simultaneous. I think it was simultaneous, but in order to describe it, I could focus on the center of this star full of light, but I could also follow each ray. And I could also see that each ray was surrounded by a very small empty space that separated it from the nearest rays. So I had the feeling that each ray occupied a small space, okay? And I could feel the emptiness and the fullness of all of this light. So I felt I was everything. I felt I was all that is. But at the same time, I felt that I was also the space, the empty space that all that is occupies. So this was a feeling that I can only describe as being full and empty at the same time. So when I was there, I really did, I don't recall having any thoughts or thinking about myself. I think when I recall this moment, I had no knowledge of ever being a human. I was I was the light. So I remained there. I don't know for how long, but like I said, I had the feeling that I was all that is, and that that light was all that is, extending into infinity. So all of a sudden, I found myself in my bed. This was in the middle of the night. I gasped for air. I have always thought that I stopped breathing, and I uh, later had some tests later in life, and I was diagnosed with sleep apnea. So maybe that had something to do. I had always suffered from asthma too. I don't know, but since I cannot prove that I died or not, I have always called it a near-death-like experience. However, after talking with several researchers, they say it was a legitimate near-death experience, but I prefer to call it a near-death-like experience, just in case. So in any case, when I woke up, I was really, I had the memory really fresh, but this was unlike any other memory because it was normally when you have a memory, you're looking in front of you, but this sensation of being able to see everything around me was like in another dimension. It was like another type of space. So I woke up, gasped for air, and raised in my bed, and I said, held my head in my hands, and I said, "What? What's going on?" I couldn't believe it, and I could still feel that I was there. So, and I could still feel that I was one with everything. So I got up from my bed, looked around the room, and I could feel that I was everything that surrounded me as well as myself. So I had the urge to go to the nearest wall and touch the wall. When I touched the wall, I pressed my hand against the wall. I could feel I was my hand pressing against the wall, but I was also the wall pressing back. So I had the sensation that everything is full of life and that I am everything. But this sensation of being the wall pressing back was mind blowing. So I, uh, I, I continued feeling this sense of oneness for a couple of days. It gradually faded, but I could not understand what I had experienced. I was really confused, and there was no one to talk to. I mentioned it to. I was married at the same time back then, and I told my wife about it, and she couldn't understand it. She said, "No, it was probably a dream." I was not familiar with near-death experiences back then, so I was really confused. So 2 days later, I started, asking God or the universe for an explanation. And 2 nights later, I felt this presence in my room, and it was like a very ancient presence, and it gave me like an explanation. It was a brief poem that went like this: In the beginning was the one, but the one was alone and he wanted to play. So he divided himself into two, gave number two amnesia, and thus the game began. That was it.
Wow.
When I heard this, I said, wow, that's the explanation of what happened to me, but it's also the explanation of this reality and also the explanation of the creation of the world. So this was like too much information to digest in a few seconds. So, but I understood it was a profound uh, wisdom. However, I, uh, like I said, I didn't have much information at the time. So what I did, since I was already studying different religions, I said, wow, this seems like the secret behind reality, the secret behind creation, and the secret behind all religions. So I grabbed first I grabbed the Gospels, and I started reading the Gospels, trying to find some clue. I knew that the Gospels had been rewritten and that they are the original text has been tampered with. You know, they have it's
Mm-hmm.
not the original version, but I said, okay, maybe something here is can is still transmitting the original teaching. So apart from God is light and that sensation that in the beginning God created the light, I found things like uh, like God is light and in him there is no darkness at all. And I also found several quotes from Jesus highlighting the importance of the light. So after doing this, I checked on different religions, and I found that this concept of the light was present in several world religions. And I had several books from different. I had the Bhagavad Gita, for example, and the Bhagavad Gita says that the supreme being is light, and the Hindus also uh, describe the Brahman, which is the ultimate reality, as light. The Buddhists refer to reality as the clearer light. And also the Muslims say that Allah is the light of heavens and earth. The Taoists in the Tao Te Ching, which is the ancient Chinese scriptures, refer to the Tao or the One, they call it the One,
Mm-hmm.
as the origin of all light. So I started finding these coincidences in the different religions. And there was one poem by Rumi that says, the lamps are different, but the light is the same. It comes from beyond. And he was referring to the fact that different religions uh, transmit the same teaching. So I started believing in that the light is the same, the lamps are different. But when you try to put this teaching in words, each person will arrive at a different interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
And back then, when these ancient scriptures were written, uh, most of them around 2,500 years ago, they were very isolated. So they each came up with their own names, explanation. In China, they called the one the Tao. In India, they call it Brahman. The Jews called it God. The Christians call it Jesus called it the Father. And there are so many denominations, you know, and even among near-death experiencers, some call it the source, others call it the God, but they call it spirit. There are so many denominations. The Native Americans called it the Great Spirit, but they are all referring to this ultimate reality that we call God, but that is basically non-dual because it integrates everything. If all is one, then there cannot be opposites. So in that non-dual uh, reality, in which I had the honor or the privilege to visit, that's why I felt empty and full at the same time, because opposites are not really opposites; they are like complementary.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, I started studying world religions and trying to see if someone else had the same experience. I joined different groups. I was with the Buddhists. I was also with the Hindus that followed Sai Baba. He also talked about the union of all religions. I was with the Gnostics, the Freemasons. I joined many different groups, transcendental meditation, and but I never found someone who had had the same experience. So as the years went by, I still didn't know much about near-death experiences. I had heard about, some cases. I did watch the movie Life After Life, but that was before I had my own experience. So I I was not really aware. I was always wondering, wow, did my mind play a trick on me? Because I haven't found anyone who has had a similar experience. So my real job, my ordinary job is I write books and I also publish books for people. So I got hired by a Spanish near-death experiencer called Tessa Romero. Her book was called 24 Minutes on the Other Side. So uh, I started working on her book and I started reading it. And all of a sudden, she also mentioned an experience in this darkness and merging with the light. So the next time we talked, I mentioned it to her and I told her about my experience. And she was the first one to say, look, I experienced something very similar. That dark place where you were is what near-death experiencers call the void. The feeling of being able to see up and down, to right, to the left, that's what we call 360-degree vision. And merging with the light and experiencing oneness is also something that many NDEers have experienced. So for the first time in my life, I found someone who had experienced more or less the same that I had. So I took deep interest in NDEs, and since I'm a journalist, I said, okay, I'm going to start interviewing people rather than basing my conclusions on watching YouTube videos. I decided to start interviewing people. So I started. So far, I have interviewed over 100 near-death experiencers, and the more I research, I have also interviewed half a dozen near-death researchers, including Dr. Raymond Moody, who coined the term near-death experience. Also, Dr. Ping Van Lommel, who published the first study uh, with people who had suffered heart arrest and had been revived. And I also interviewed Dr. Evan Alexander, who had a near-death experience and has become an important researcher. Also, Dr. Melvin Morse, who specializes in children's NDEs, and PMH Atwater, who is also specialized in children's NDEs and adult ones too. So I really researched. So far I've written 2 books, and the foreword was written by Dr. Melvin Morse, the second one by Dr. Raymond Moody.
Wow.
And when I started noticing that these experiences were so different, yet so alike, I said, wow, this is more or less what I found when I started studying the different religions. Different religions are very, very different, but also very, very alike because they all talk about oneness. They all talk about this reality as an illusion, and they all talk about the importance of differentiating real reality from the illusory reality. And that's when I uh, started working on what I called the Tower of Babel theory.
Yeah, I'm excited to jump into this. So much information. I'm so glad that you brought up your experience and that 360-degree view that people talk about, that oneness experience. Like you were saying, you put your hand on the wall and you were the wall in addition to yourself, and the light and how it's all about seeing the light. I want you to go into a description about this theory, the Tower of Babel theory. Can you do that for us, AJ, and like kind of walk us through how you came upon this theory? And, you know, let's start with the light, the boundary, and the seven planes that you talk about also.
Okay, well, first of all, I would like to mention that when I started interviewing near-death experiencers, I found that apart from the light, some people met uh, spiritual beings. Some of them talked about Jesus. Others talked about Mother Mary or Archangel Michael. Some of the people I interviewed had met Buddha. Others met Shiva, Yogananda, Babaji, Saint Germain, the Ascended Masters, Kuan Yin, and also Native American elders. However, others met extraterrestrials and even demons, and also underwater intelligent beings. So
Wow.
after finding this, I tried to understand what was going on. And the first explanation that I found was, okay, the cultural background may have to do with this. So, but then in my interviews, during my interviews, I also found people who were atheists who met God. I found two Jews who met Jesus, and a girl who had no religious uh, formation or upbringing who met Shiva. So there was something pointing out. This more or less suggested that the cultural background has to do with it, but not entirely. So I said, okay, there must be some other explanation. And that's when I decided to go deeper. I had always, since I had my experience, I had always studied quantum physics, and I had also studied Jungian psychology, the works of Carl Jung, because I wanted to understand what had happened to me. But after uh, noticing these variations, I decided to show in a single theory. This is a speculative theory. It's based on speculations, just like the string theory is, and the multiverse theory. You cannot prove scientifically that there are different universes. So these are what they call speculative theories. So I tried to create an explanation based on NDE research, based on interdimensional perception, based on quantum metaphysics, based on non-local consciousness, Jungian archetypes, and spirituality in general. So that was my basis of this study. And I called it the Tower of Babel theory because in the Bible, there's a story about some people who uh, tried to build a tower that would reach heaven. So they started building this tower, and God felt that these are trying to find an artificial way to reach heaven. So he disapproved of this, and he made them speak a different language. So the builders of the tower could not understand each other, and they ended up dispersing, and the tower was never finished. So similarly, or based on this, I explained that metaphorically, the tower could symbolize the path of NDEs and also of mystical experiences. Whoever rises on the tower, whoever reaches the top, has a very subjective experience, an ineffable experience beyond words. And each person, when they come down, they have their own interpretation of what happened. And it is just like they were speaking a different language. So they do not understand each other. And that's why I called it the Tower of Babel theory. And I call this psychological effect the Tower of Babel syndrome. It consists of creating your own or co creating your own image of the spiritual world. We do not perceive the spiritual world as it is because it is beyond this dimension and beyond many other dimensions. This the really higher dimensions are multi-dimensional, and we cannot conceive them with this three-dimensional mind, and we are forced to interpret them or to make our own independent image of them.
There's a theory that we cannot perceive those realms because they're out of our range. They're because we are in the third dimension and they are beyond our dimension, that we don't have the brain power, skill, what have you, to be able to perceive them, in addition to the concept of what the other side might be. That is too grand for our 3D minds, our physical minds, to be able to comprehend what it actually would be.
Yes, that's true. In my presentation, I gave an example of the people. Let's imagine that there are people living in the 2D world instead of a 3D. Einstein say this is a four-dimensional world because he considers time another dimension, but let's say this is a 3D world. So if someone from the 2D world, which is only flat, they don't know about height. They only know about width, the two dimensions. Okay, and for them it is everything is flat. Okay, so if someone from that world tries to perceive the third dimension, it would be impossible. It is impossible for someone in a lower dimension to imagine a higher dimension. Similarly, it is impossible for us in this third dimension to imagine or conceive a higher dimension. However, people talk about the fifth dimension, the sixth dimension. There are unlimited dimensions. So you could be on the 20th dimension and you could still be unable to grasp the 21st. So this is a law that seems to exist endlessly. These beings, like Jesus, like the angels, like our spiritual guides, they belong to very high dimensions. So when people perceive them, they do not perceive them in their true form. For example, Jesus, okay, people imagine him or perceive him as more or less like a human. But in those higher dimensions, the shapes, the possible shapes that they have does not resemble a human. It is different.
You talk about also a boundary, and I think that this applies to that perception piece too. That when people have an NDE, there seems to be a boundary that they can't cross.
Yeah, many of the people I have interviewed, and also many of the people who have shared their NDEs to researchers and on YouTube, many of the near-death experiences have talked about this boundary. This boundary can be a line, can be a door, can be a gate. There's always a border or a boundary that they cannot cross unless they decide to go and never come back to Earth. So they are always given the chance before they cross the boundary to come back. However, when a near-death experiencer visits heaven, which I call the first heaven, because beyond this boundary lies the real heaven, uh, they can, for example, if there's a door, they can look through the door and they can probably see light. They can more or less perceive what lies in the other side of this boundary, but they cannot experience it. And all these beings, including the deceased people that they see, they come from behind the boundary. So they come from a higher dimension, which is beyond the boundary. So when these near-death experiencers perceive an angel, Jesus, a deceased relative, they are not perceiving them in their higher dimensional form. So what does this mean? That they have a limited perception of these beings, because these beings are multidimensional. They're high. They let's say they live beyond the boundary. So that's another dimension, another world. And apparently, people who cross that line never come back. However, there are some near-death experiencers who have met the highest dimension of all, which is the dimension of oneness of the light. Okay, and that same light can be experienced in this side of the boundary too. When people see the tunnel, they see the light at the end of the tunnel, and they merge with oneness. Okay, so oneness exists or can present itself in this side of the boundary as well as in the other. But these, let's say, these higher heavens are beyond reach even for near-death experiencers. The place that near-death experiencers visit is not where the deceased people dwell. It's a place that they can visit. I mean, let's use the example of the Tower of Babel. These are different layers or floors. So you can be in the 10th floor, and someone from the 11th floor can come down and visit you in the 10th floor. But if you try to see the 11th floor, you cannot see it. You cannot imagine it. It's beyond your reach. You have lower dimensional barriers that do not allow you to see the higher dimensional realities. So that's more or less what made me think about certain possibilities. One of them is, according to quantum physics, we give shape to this reality. It's called the observer effect. Reality is basically made up of waves, and these waves are more than real things. They are potentialities. These are, it's another dimension. But when we observe them, they transform into particles. So particles are really waves, but when we observe them, they become particles. So what I considered is that there is like a subtle matter in this side of the boundary. There are still waves and particles, but very, very subtle. These are so subtle that no one has ever proved that they exist. However, there are quantum physicists and also quantum metaphysicists who accept this theory. And based on this, I came up with the possibility that when someone perceives Jesus, for example, the observer effect makes the person co-create not Jesus, but certain details about him. For example, some of the people I have interviewed say, okay, Jesus was blonde and had blue eyes. But other people that I have interviewed said, no, I met Jesus and he had black hair and dark eyes. And another person that I interviewed said, no, 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 he has white hair. So how can this be? How can the same Jesus have all these different uh, physical attributes? So the only thing I could come up with to explain this is that they each give shape to the details, not they don't give shape to Jesus. Jesus is the same higher dimensional being with no body. But when they see him as a human body, and some of them see them blonde with dark hair or with white hair, according to their own subconscious information, which includes past lives, everything that you have experienced since you were born, and what Carl Jung names the unconscious and the collective unconscious. So I concluded, or my proposal is that there is an observer effect in this side of the boundary that makes us co-create angels. For example, some of the people I interviewed say, yeah, angels have wings. Others say, no, 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 angels don't have wings. Some say angels look more or less like humans. Others say, no, angels are simply light beings. And others say, no, they are orbs. So, what is the true shape of an angel? A human? A light being? An orb? No, it's beyond that. They are pure energy in higher dimensions. We cannot even conceive or imagine their real shape. They must be like explosions of energy or stars. I don't know what they are. But somehow each person sees them in their own way. So I started studying Carl Jung's theories deeper, and he says the following, which is really interesting. When we're born, we have what he calls archetypes. These are part of the collective unconscious, which is shared with every human being. But these archetypes are perceived differently by every single individual. Um, if I see the archetype of Jesus, my Jesus will not be the same as your Jesus. And according to Carl Jung, these archetypes show up in mystical dreams, normal dreams, and also in mystical visions. And NDE is more or less like a mystical vision. So I came up with a term called the archetypal filter, which makes us filter the the real big form of these spiritual beings. When we see an angel, we cannot perceive its higher dimensional shape. We are forced to see them through this archetypal filter, and also through the filter that the observer effect creates, according to quantum metaphysics. So this is kind of complicated to explain briefly, but that's more or less the idea. And we each uh, co-create our reality, but we also co-create our perception of the spiritual realms. We also co-create how we perceive God. We also co-create how we perceive angels, spiritual guides. And that's why everyone who has a near-death experience, a mystical experience, or a mystical dream will come back with a different interpretation, and it is as though they each spoke a different language.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how even in day-to-day life, how we see things is from our own perception, our own belief systems, our own experiences.
Right.
So we overlay and project all of that onto our outside world. I've also heard another theory where they show up the way that we can see them, which also speaks to our perception of the world and how we view the world, that they would show up, okay, this person views this way, so this is how we're going to show up this way. So there's acceptance of, what's in front because of the own individual perception of the person onto life.
Right. Well, what you just said does not exclude the fact that if they decide to show up with Liz to you, they will they know what's in your unconscious, they know what's in your collective unconscious, and they know how they're going to show up, because that's the only way they can show up to you. It's not a matter of choosing. There's only one way you can perceive them, and it's your way. And God decides, or these beings decides, more or less how they want to show up. But the final perception is up to these mechanisms that are in your unconscious.
Mhm.
And the A Course in Miracle talks a lot about co-creation. And what they say is that when people co-create, they are not creating or imagining. No, no. The word co-creation means creating with someone else. Co-create. Let's co-create together. Okay, but who? The Course in Miracles says you can only co-create with God, who is the real creator. And we and humans are their co-creators. So if 10 people watch a movie, they will each find different things in that movie. Some will like it, some will not. Some will say, "Oh, wow, something happened when I watched this movie. I don't want to see it again." And others see it 10 times, watch it 10 times. So Carl Jung said that this reality, what we perceive when we look around, is not really what we see. It's what we interpret, because everything has an archetype. And also, according to neuroscience, when we see the world around us, we're not seeing the world around us, because our eyes, they capture the light, they transform it into electricity, the optical nerve takes it to the brain, and then the brain creates a hologram, more or less like it creates a dream. So we think they are outside, but really what we're watching is an image created within our mind. And this image is different, or could be completely different for everyone. For example, one of the things that when I interviewed Dr. Melvin Morse, he says, "How do you know that my color red is the same color red that you're seeing?
Mhm.
How do we know that the colors are the same for all of us?" So we each watch a hologram in our minds of what we call reality. And we have been trained to think that what we see is really outside. But what surrounds us is not this physical world. It's pure energy, pure light. Since our senses can only capture certain frequencies, that's the way we see the world. We see a tiny bit of frequencies, but there are endless frequencies. So that's why some people say that these higher dimensions actually occupy this same space, but that they are vibrating at faster speeds, and
Mhm.
we cannot perceive them. So there are a lot of theories, and it's really complex, and you can go crazy if you try to analyze them all. So what I tried to do was to simplify it as best as I could. And it why did I do this? Well, basically, I first did this to give myself a better understanding, and also to allow people to understand that if your near death experience is so too different from the other ones, there's no problem. Each near death experience is completely different, or at least there are no two that are identical. Perhaps two people can have more or less similar experiences, like uh, a lot of people when they go to heaven, they see a field full of flowers. They see people with white robes. So some things are more or less similar, but they each have different things. Other people don't go to heaven; they go to outer space, or they go to another planet, or they go to the darkness. And some people even say they went to hellish realms. So this all depends on your unconscious power to co-create. Uh,
I think
some of the people who have had near-death experiences have come back and saying that in heaven, whatever you think appears. If you think of your mother will appear. If you think of flowers, you'll see flowers. If you say, "Hey, I want to go to that mountain," you're there. So, and they have been also told that here on Earth we're also co-creating, but it takes us longer. It's harder. But the book The Secret, the film The Secret, a lot of metaphysical explanations say, even Jesus said it, that that you can create your own reality, and
I very much believe that.
basically we are co-creating.
Yeah.
Excuse me?
I very much believe that as well, that we are co-creators, and that I've also heard about
Yeah,
instant manifestation over on the other side. And one of the things that we need to learn to manipulate the energy here in our existence for that instant manifestation as well. I also think it's fascinating that you were talking about different experiences about where they went to that co-creation process, because during my healing sessions, I was working on someone, and in their field, they had opened up hell. And I literally heard the screams from hell. Now, that I felt like that was a man-made creation. I also have a story. Years ago, a friend of mine was working at a retirement home, and this man was there. He had committed murder and was worried about what was going to happen to him afterwards. And when he started to pass, he started to yell and scream, "It's hot. Please help me. I don't want to go there." So I really do think that, AJ, what you were saying about, each person, seeing what they feel like they're going to experience, you know, has some validity because of experiences that I've witnessed or heard about, and other near-death experiencers too.
yeah, that's true. There's a case. I don't know if you've heard about Kathy McDaniel, but when I was coming up with this theory, I interviewed her. I've interviewed her like 3 times, and she mentions the fact that she co-created her own hell because she went to hell. And she said that she had been raised Catholic, and that ever since she was a little girl, they had taught her that if you you didn't go to church on Sundays, that was a sin. If you did this and that, that was a sin. So she had always feared hell. And when she was in her near-death experience, she went to hell. And these demons made her do horrible things. And she said she spent several years in hell, but she never thought about God. She never thought about Jesus. It was simply something that was she never thought about that. But the day that she implored Jesus, remembered Jesus, and started saying his name, He was taken out of there. And when she came back, she said, wow, I co-created my own hell because of everything I had been told ever since I was a little girl. So I said, wow, this is an evidence that people do co-create things. And I have her interviewed people who have had hellish experiences, and they each describe a different hell. They each describe different experience. And I've also interviewed Nancy Evans Bush. She is the world's leading expert on distressing NDEs, which include uh, hellish experiences. And we've had long conversations. I've interviewed her twice, but we have also become friends, and I've interviewed her. And what she says is that yes, people do co-create their own hell. For example, she also said that the mass media, books, movies, even cartoons, talk about the devil, fire, hell. So people associate fire with hell.
Hmm.
There's like an image popularized by Dante in the Middle Ages, and uh, of this hellish realm, and a lot of people
Dante's
are
Inferno.
influenced by this, and they create their own image. And I, after accepting this, I said, wait, this could also happen in heaven. That's why each people perceive heaven differently. So I'm not saying that the heaven that you who may be watching this, you, a near-death experiencer who went to heaven, I'm not saying that you made it up. No, I'm just saying that your details are different only because you are different, and your perception is unique, and the information you have in your unconscious, your past lives, made you perceive it that way. And also, that explains why a Jew may see Jesus or an atheist may meet God, because maybe in this lifetime they were Jews, or maybe in this lifetime they were atheists, but maybe in past lives they were really spiritual. And, you know, a lot of near death experiencers talk about their past life, are shown past lives. So this is something that it also becomes part of our collective memory. We do have like a past life memory, and all of this affects the way we perceive the world, this world, and the way we perceive the higher dimensions. Well, that's my point of view. You don't have to accept it. You don't have to say that I'm wrong or right. That's only a proposal. That's only what I came up with in
Mhm.
order to give myself an explanation.
It's a great explanation too, especially when you look at that as above, so below theory, right? I mean, I've been following this one person that had a spiritual awakening, and he has started talking about it online because he feels that talking and teaching about it actually helps him absorb it more. And you can watch him and how the universe proves it to him on a daily basis with coincidences and synchronicities and discoveries and people he runs into. And I experienced that in my life too through my awakening, where I was, the coincidences, the synchronicities, the one thing leading to another, every little breadcrumb leading to the next breadcrumb, and my experience kind of proving my, itself to me. So I can see, if you look at the as above, so below theory, why not? When if I were to have a near death experience, for it to be overlaid with my belief systems, my perceptions, my experiences, what I expect to be there, right? And then also the subconscious, where I'm living my day and picking up all of these subtle things that I may or may not be aware of. And then if I have a mystical experience, maybe that comes in. I mean, I've had several where I asked to see God and I saw Shiva, I had a near-death experience when I was 15, and my grandmother said, it wasn't time for me yet, and I woke up. I've had a living life review where I woke up one day knowing that I was going to die. It's been a year this month since that experience. And I felt oneness. I went backwards in time to being in utero and then forward again and seeing the love, that the world was and the beauty that the world is. And, just crying all day and feeling, that experience. So, yeah, I think it's just possible for us to, one, have these experiences, and two, have them um, also relate to how we may perceive the world. Now, I think that that last experience that I just explained, just very briefly, was a gift to me so I could see beyond my perception at the time, a glimpse into something else other than what I was experiencing beforehand, because it completely changed my view and perception on life afterwards. So I think that there are those, like, our experiences and, experiencing stuff from um our experience, or the consciousness proving itself to us through what we receive, but also those experiences that go, hey, you know, calling you up on the phone right now, this is God going to let you know that there's something different than, the average experience, right? And here's this experience to kind of show
Right.
you that there's something more. The yes and, always the yes and.
Yeah. I agree. I'm gonna have to interview you. That sounded very interesting.
It was very interesting. It's completely changed my life. Yeah, I like to say I live from soul now, my soul experience. And I definitely, after that happened, it's been this back and forth between my ego and my soul for a while. And then coming to the realization that I am soul living a human experience and thoroughly being soul led instead of just small self S, small s, Liz led.
Yeah. Well, I agree that we are spirits having a human experience, but based on my own experience, I always say we are God having a human experience
Yes.
more than a soul, or
Yeah.
spirit. We are God. We each are God having a human experience, because in where God lives, he is the only person there. If he is oneness, then there are no others in that realm of oneness. So the only way he can experience others is in this dream or creation that he came up with. So everything, even the smallest subatomic particle, is God having a subatomic particle experience. So this is God. A rock is God having a rock experience. And everything is God having this experience of reality, what we call reality. But according to quantum physics, according to the mystics, and according to the esoteric teachings, metaphysics, the real reality is oneness.
Mhm.
And this is an illusion. Some people even say that this is a dream of God. The Hermetic teachings say that all is mind, and that all this is taking place within the mind of God. The non-local theorists say that there is a single consciousness, and that everything takes place within consciousness. And that's what the quantum physics observer effects is based on. the universe does not exist unless it is perceived.
Mhm.
So that basically, wraps it up.
Yeah. So fascinating, so wonderful. And the more and more I work with my dreams and the more experiences I have in my dreams, I've always been a dreamer. I've always dreamt of other places, other worlds, and has had experiencing dream time. But when I look into shared dream experience and co-dreaming and all these other different possibilities within the dream, especially after my mom passed a couple years ago, her coming into my dreams, or friends who had passed on and they're on the other side of the country and coming into my dream before I find out the next day or a couple days later that they've passed, I think, is all relative to that we are living a dream. And I heard someone say not too long ago, last week, we have, or when we, let's see if I can get this right. Um, we have to die to the dream to wake up into another dream, I believe is how it went. Speaking to,
Yeah,
this reality being a dream, dying to the dream to live and then dream again.
right. That's what the term awakening truly means. No, awakening from the dream of
Yes.
this illusory reality. But, I'm not saying this because I consider myself a guru or something like that. No, no, no. I'm saying this because this brings us an understanding. And I also accept that we each have our own understanding, and that some people may watch this and say, no, no, that's not what I think. I totally agree. We each have our own perception of reality, our own perception of God. And what
100%.
I do promote and what I try to stress is tolerance. Tolerance. We each have a different view. We should not attack each other because we hold different beliefs. We should not, we should stop this war against religions or between religions. And I have seen so many times when I post a near-death experience on YouTube, some of the comments, there's always someone saying, that's the work of the devil because the Bible says this and this.
Hmm.
Yeah, the Bible probably says different things, but so do each scripture from different religions. So people should have an open mind if they do want to understand uh, what spirituality is. And although they are free to follow a single religion, what I try to promote is that we need like a higher view and see the religious and the spiritual phenomena as from above all denominations, because all religions have the same root. There is only one God. So all religions, no matter how they call God, they are referring to the same God. And in this world, people don't realize that, and they continue fighting against each other due to religious beliefs and spiritual beliefs. And one of the things that I noticed when I joined different religions is that uh, our God is the only true God. Our way is the only way. You will be damned. You will be condemned and damned if you don't follow our religion.
Yeah.
Ours is the only true religion, and all the rest are wrong. That attitude is not Is not what I agree with. I don't think that there is only one way to climb a mountain and reach the top. There are many ways you can climb a mountain, and you can reach the summit, and it's basically the same summit, but one person may describe their journey in one way, and others will describe their journey in different ways. And there's a story in the Hindu tradition about an elephant and some blind men who walked up to the elephant and tried to describe it. So when they came out, they asked these blind men and they said, what does the elephant look like? And the guy who held the trunk said, oh, he's like a big serpent. The other guy who touched only the tail said, oh, it's like a small broom. And the other guy who touched the leg, no, it's like large pillars. And the other guy who touched the torso of the elephant said, oh, it's like a big wall. So we are those blind people because we cannot perceive higher dimensions. And we are each giving our own interpretation a different meaning. We are taking our own interpretation of reality as if it was the only truth. But no, the elephant is larger than that.
Yeah, I believe too that there are many pathways to God and that they're placed there for a purpose because we all need our own way there, right? And it may not include religion at all or spirituality, but we all have a place. Some of us become seekers and some of us don't, and that's okay. And we each have our own way. And that's one of the things that I really loved about your Tower of Babel theory is that you offered at the end that if we all see that we all see from our own perception, then there's more acceptance. And it's funny, acceptance is the card that I drew today and have on my altar along with my candle that I always light before I do a recording. And I think that through these ideas, theories, and ways that we can learn how to accept each other for the way that we are choosing, to be spiritual or be religious or live our lives or be ourselves or be authentic or have our own personal sovereignty, right? And experience this world the way that we choose to experience it, of course, with no harm, of course. Yeah. But I think that that's one of my favorite things, my favorite takeaway, at the end is that with this, we can see like we can accept everybody, because everybody's got their own way and that is okay.
Yes,
And we are just God having this experience, and God wants to have a bazillion different experiences, right? And how else can He experience everything unless we're all different? We don't all fit in the box.
that's right.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a really interesting conversation.
Yeah, this has been great, AJ. Thank you so much for joining me today. Um, I always ask, so one final question before I have you share how people can reach you. What is a jewel of wisdom that you would like to leave our audience with today?
Well, we should remember that we are, like my small poem said, we are God who wanted to play, and he divided himself into a zillion number twos and gave each one amnesia, and thus the game began. So this is only God having fun, experiencing all these different possibilities, and death does not really exist because we are God. Uh, our problems are only illusions. Life is great. Everything is good. Even bad things that may happen to us, they help us become stronger. And in the end, they are all taking us to a spiritual growth that we deserve. And this spiritual growth is based on remembering where we come from and remembering who we are. And that is the basis of this existence. We are going from total amnesia to the remembrance of being God.
I love that. Thank you, AJ. That
Thank
was
you for inviting
fantastic.
me.
How can people reach you besides being able to see your presentation on IANDS? I highly recommend it, IANDS.com, and you can see his presentation there. But how can they reach you? How can they find your books?
Well, I have a YouTube channel, AJ Parr Spiritual Journalist. You can type AJ Parr on YouTube and you'll find it. I, like I mentioned, I have a publishing company. and I help people write and publish their books on Amazon. If anyone's interested, they can contact me. And my email is ajparbooks dot gmail.com. No, ajparbooks at gmail.com. I also have one of I think it's the third or fourth largest NDE group in Facebook. It's called Spiritual Awakenings. No, it's called Near-Death Experiences and Spiritual Awakening. It has 140,000 members right now, and you're invited to join. You can find me on Facebook by simply typing AJ Parr, and my name will appear. And anyone who wants to reach out, I'll be more than glad to answer their message.
Fantastic. Awesome. AJ, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to host you. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Liz. I love your podcast. Take care.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for joining us. Again, I'm Liz Peterson, and this is Raise the Vibe with Liz. And you can find me on all social media platforms and my website at raisethevibewithliz.com. Thanks, everybody. And remember to get out there and raise the vibe. Have a great day, everybody. Bye now.